Yeshua, thank you so much. And I invite up Rabbi Dr. Rob Lennick to offer some words of Torah.
Good Yom Tov, everybody. I'm Rob, and Loretta and I are delighted to be with you. Thank you for inviting us. There was a Jew in the old country who came into an inheritance and decided in this little shtetl to build a new shul. And the shul was built. It wasn't very big. And they had a dedication, a Chanukat Hashul. And everybody showed up. And at the dedication, the rabbi handed each family a lamp. This was before electricity. And the rabbi said, I'm giving you this lamp so that whenever you come to the shul, you'll bring it inside, and there'll be a place where you can set it. So when you arrive, you'll be bringing your light with you, and you'll be setting it up near you, and that will light your section of the synagogue. And then the rabbi said, but if you don't show up, it's going to be pretty dark inside. The reason I'm telling you this story is because this shul is filled with light. You are the lights whenever you're here. And this morning, as we sat through the service, first of all, Yasher Koach to the Chazunas, beautiful. And to this congregation, when I was joining with you in singing, as the Torah was coming out of the ark. I grew up in a conservative synagogue. It took me back to the happiest memories I have of being in shul and hearing all the voices together. So I just wanted to thank you for that and for bringing your light. Now, it turned out that Moses and Hashem decided to play golf. And Moses got up to hit the ball, swings very nicely. The ball goes straight down the fairway about 200 yards, nice shot. So it's God's turn. Now, of course, you can't see God. So all of a sudden, a golf ball appeared. And then you could hear the sound of a swinging club, though you couldn't see it. And the ball went straight up in the air, a true bad shot. But at that very moment, an eagle came down from the sky and grabbed the ball before it could hit the ground. And the eagle carried the ball 270 yards to the front of the green. And then the eagle dropped the ball, and waiting there on the ground was a gopher, ready to catch the golf ball. And the gopher catches the golf ball and walks it over to the edge of the cup, where lo and behold, an army of ants are waiting right there. He places the ball of the army of ants. The army of ants come to the edge of the cup, and a breeze blows. Ball goes in the hole, hole in one. So Moses shakes his head and looks up and said, okay, now you're going to perform miracles or you're going to play golf? Today I want to talk about miracles. Before I get to it, I want you to know that the first Yom Kippur sermon I ever delivered was in 1981 as a rabbinical student 40 years ago today. And it was a hopeful, youthful enumeration of the reasons to be proud to be a Jew. Since then, like all rabbis, I struggle each year trying to decide what to talk about. And young rabbis are misled to believe that their entire year depends on the brilliance of a Rosh Hashanah drash. And there's the notion that the sermons of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, make or break everything. After all, it's the one time during the year when most people are present. And so rabbis are taught, this is your shot. Make the best of it. I can tell you that this pressure on rabbis continues, and this year the pressure is more than ever. My colleagues have been sharing on the internet the unique challenges and feelings of preparing for the holidays this year, and the reasons are obvious. COVID-19, waxing and waning. So many losses this past year. The deepening consequences of isolation. The fear of anti-Semitism and polarization in society. Environmental, global warming, racism, marginalization, the growing normalization of extremism in the United States, the complex relationship with Israel, and most of all, the growing yearning for a spiritual connection at a time of palpable alienation. We're living in frightful times, and people are begging for an antidote, not just for the virus, but for the pervasive stress that people are feeling. And rabbis could be speaking about any of these, and most of them are. I was most taken by a colleague who reported online, I'm not giving a sermon this year. He said, I'm just going to go up on the bima and cry for 10 minutes. Now, when I was a young rabbi, before I found my own voice, giving a sermon was akin to giving a lecture about the finer points of Jewish tradition and insights of the rabbinic sages. And let me tell you, those sermons were long, terribly sophomoric, and I have nothing but admiration for those people who politely sat through them. When I was about 35 years old, 30 years ago, someone cared enough to say to me the following, Rob, why don't you just speak with us on the holidays? Open the door to the mystical and talk about what you've learned about life. And then she said, trust me, the rest will take care of itself. And she was right. So here I am 40 years later, in the midst of the most profoundly challenging eras in our lifetimes, and I have decided the following: not to talk about COVID-19, not to talk about the Delta variant, or politics, or climate change, or racism, or Israel, because frankly, I don't think I have much to add to what we are all experiencing. Instead, this morning I want to talk very personally. And even though most of us are just meeting for the first time, I want to talk to you personally about faith. Those of you who do know me or have ever studied with me know that my faith is oriented toward philosophy and rationalism. And I believe in a God who did indeed create the universe with a purpose, with a design, and did it as an act of love. I truly believe this. And most of the time, not all of the time, I also believe that God is not directly involved in the affairs of humanity, because then the world would be terribly unfair. Worse than the unfairness of randomness, it would be unfair because that's the kind of faith where you can accept God says yes to one and no to another. And I can't do that. Because I believe we've been created with free will, and ultimately, as the rabbis taught, the world will be determined in part by our choices. But at the same time, I also believe that God is affirmatively, is indirectly involved in the universe, because I also believe God designed the universe to be inclined toward goodness. What does it mean? For example, while the discovery of penicillin was an accident of sorts, I believe the elements that were combined by humans that led to penicillin were intentionally put into the design of the universe by a loving God in hopes, holding a belief in humans that with our minds, we would put the pieces together into an antibiotic. So it's not completely random, and it's not completely predetermined. The rabbi said all is foreseen and free will is given. In the prayer book, there's a line I once read that said, "Pray as if everything depends on God." That's what we're doing today. But it goes on and says, act as if everything depends on you. And that's the equation, my spiritual equation, in part. But I also want to make a confession. My faith is always in doubt. My faith is always in flux. I've had many times in life when I railed at God, rejected any notion of God, cursed at God from the depth of personal anguish. And yes, I've also had times of blissful belief in the God of the Bible, the doer of miracles, source of wonder. I have had the joy of childlike faith and the sadness and despair of spiritual emptiness. And that is why it is called faith, not certainty. Looking back, I can tell you that I've been blessed, and I hope you all have been too, with unusual moments where faith was kindled unexpectedly, even from the midst of sorrow. And I'm now going to tell you about one such moment. This is a very difficult story to tell. I've shared it maybe once or twice over all these years. 30 years ago, I was a rabbi in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I got a phone call from the chief of police, who I knew well. And he proceeded to tell me that there had been a situation with 2 high school boys who were very angry, very distraught, both sets of parents going through terrible, ugly divorces. And the 2 young men, 10th graders, went out into the woods and made a pact, drank a bottle of whiskey, recorded their last moments on a cassette tape recorder, and in an act of rage, one boy took the life of the other boy, and then the second boy took his own life. One of those boys was a member of our shul, son of a mixed marriage, good people, but in a very dark time. I went over to the home of the father, who was Jewish, to the most horrible thing I've ever witnessed. try to bring some comfort, to find out the mother and father were at war. The mother insisting on a Catholic funeral, the father wanting a Jewish funeral. The boy was raised Jewish. It was so ugly, by the end of that day, I had to go before a judge. And the judge spoke to the parents. He was a priest. And I was there. And the judge said, would you allow a Jewish funeral in the synagogue and then the burial of the boy in a Catholic cemetery? The rabbi will conduct the funeral, synagogue. The priest will conduct the prayers in the Catholic cemetery. And I certainly agreed to it. We have the funeral the next day. We go to the cemetery. We're standing at the grave. At which point the father notices on the casket there's no Jewish star. And he becomes very, very upset. I will not let my son be buried without a Jewish star. Now, this was before the age of cell phones. At which point, a brother-in-law from each side got into a tussle and started having a fight. And they fell into the grave. And the poor Catholic priest is sitting there going, Oy Gewalt. And I'm the young 35-year-old rabbi thinking, oh my God. We pull these crazed people out of the grave. I walk over to these two men and say, you haven't had enough anguish already? At which point, I had this feeling come over me. We were on top of a hill, and I looked down at the bottom of the hill, and there's a little garage for the cemetery, and I said to everyone, stay here, don't move, and be quiet. I walked down the hill in my black robe. I go into the garage, and there's 4 gravediggers sitting at a table playing cards. And I said to them, the craziest thing I probably ever said. We have a situation. I know this is a Catholic cemetery, but you wouldn't have some Jewish stars lying around. They kind of looked at each other, and I said, do you have a phone? I could call the funeral home. Maybe they'll bring one up. Man got up from his chair, walked behind a wall, came back out, and handed me 2 wooden Jewish stars. This is one of them, actual from 30 years ago. He said, well, it never has happened before, but a week ago, we had 2 funerals of Jewish spouses that were buried here, and they took the stars off. And they just were put back here. And he handed me 2 of these very stars. And I can tell you, in my whole life, I never felt so vividly the notion that there's a lot more going on around us than we realize. Now, you might consider it amusing, but to me it was just stunning. So here's the rabbi in the Catholic cemetery holding a wooden star, walking up the hill. And as I walked up the hill with the star in my hand, everyone became silent. Get to the top, the hill, place the other star on the casket. The priest says the prayers. People are completely silent, and not another word was spoken, and everybody left. in a state of awe. Now, in the book of Psalms, chapter 136, we read, Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chasto. We read those words whenever we say the Hallel on the Chagim. And it goes on. And the last line says, La'asot niflaot gedolot levado, ki le'olam chasdo. Who alone works great wonders? God's steadfast love is eternal. I must admit, in the midst of all we've been through this past year, whenever I felt feelings of despair, I look at this star, which stands on my bookshelf. It's a reminder that no matter how bad things get, and no matter how things appear, there's more going on beyond my comprehension. There's good to be found if we look for the good. There's good to be shared if we bring it to others. And there are signs and wonders. Signs and wonders, niflaot. Things too incredible to simply be coincidence. There are mysteries needing our attention. And I'm not proposing we believe in the hocus pocus of fundamentalism, nor the fear and trembling of old-fashioned faith. What I'm saying is, in this new year, especially this new year, let's just be open to the possibility of being awestruck. And welcome the signs, and welcome the wonders. So that, one of the things we have in New Mexico that's unlike any place else are sunsets. So when we see a sunset, let us watch it without saying, a little more red over here, please. A little less yellow on that side. So our bracha for this year is to embrace everyday miracles and breathe. As a wise person once said to me 30 years ago, if we do that, the rest will take care of itself. Amen. Good yontif.
I want to thank Rob. I met Rob last year, and we are both from Boston, and we hit it off. And I asked him to do this, and